In this episode, we're going to talk about money fitness. What do we need to know about money that we don't get taught at school? What can we do to make the most of our income? And what else can you invest in besides property? Welcome to Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast for first home buyers who want to get it right.
I'm Megan and that was Veronica. We're both buyer's agents and probably old enough to be your mums. But that's a good thing because between us, we've got over 40 years experience and we are going to share with you bucket loads of stories about avoidable mistakes. Together, we're going to make sure that you get unbiased and real information that you can rely on so you can get where you want to be without missing a step.
Now, we've got loads of great tips for you in this episode, and if you'd like more useful tools, head over to the website homebuyeracademy.com.au. There you'll find free checklists that you can download, a free mini course on how to price a property, and our Where to Buy workshop for only $39. Priceless stuff, really.
Bargain. But before we get into the interesting stuff in this week's episode, here's the boring bit, the disclaimer. You, of course, know that nothing in this podcast is to be taken as personal advice. We always recommend getting the advice of an expert in their field of expertise. Now, we've done our very best to ensure that the content is correct at the time of recording, but things change. So check with the relevant government authority or your advisors to get the most up-to-date information.
Today, we're talking about money fitness with Owen Raszkiewicz, host of the Australian Finance Podcast and the Australian Investors Podcast. Owen is really passionate about educating people about money management and investing, and there's a whole heap of beginner-friendly courses available on his website, and I'll include the link in the show notes. We've invited Owen to join us today because not only can he share some great budgeting and finance tips, but there is one thing that a lot of property people don't like to do, but we're up for, and that is discussing other investment opportunities beyond real estate. Stick around to find out exactly why we want to discuss this.
So true. You've got to keep your mind open, Veronica. Not everybody should own a property, and that's a really important message. And some people who have done our course have come to that realisation through that process. Welcome, Owen. Really great to have you on the show. We talk a great deal about how important it is to have your support crew in place, the right people doing the right jobs with the right expertise right up front. So not halfway through the process, but right from the beginning. So we're very excited to have you here because one of the things that we think is really important, and I'm sure that this is a big part of what you're going to talk to us about today, is money fitness. Now, what comes to mind? What is that? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, firstly, thanks for having me on the show. And lovely to meet you, Megan. It's the first time we've done a podcast together. So
lovely.
It's great. So money fitness, I guess there's a lot of analogies between health, as in, when we talk about, physical health and that of money and being financially healthy. And I think, one of the things that always springs to my mind is making sure that you're flexible. So, you don't want to do yourself an injury when you're playing sports. And the easiest way to avoid that is to remain flexible and to do stretches and those types of things. And when it comes to finance, I guess the analogy would be that you want to have your finances in a position and in a situation where they can deal with just about anything. And so whatever the curveball that comes at you, you can deal with that and you can just take it in your stride and keep going. And so for me, as I was jotting down some notes ahead of this podcast, I thought to myself, what's probably my number one tip? Just straight off the bat. Number one. And that would be, and no doubt you guys are going to talk about this as the series goes on, but it's about having that emergency fund. So we talk about deposits and saving up for a first home, but what's really important throughout your entire journey, not just, pre-purchase, but also after you've bought a house, is having that emergency fund. And that's something that people often overlook. They often go straight for kicking goals with investments and that type of thing. But the thing that they neglect is the ability to be flexible with their money. And that comes from having that emergency fund. So we're talking about 3 to 6 months, ideally 6 months of cash just sitting in a bank account or an offset account, just for those, rainy day things. So the car fix up, the the flight that you need to get to go see a family member who's sick or unwell, or time off work. These are the things that spring to mind when I think of emergency fund and what it's used for.
That's really hard for first-time buyers, isn't it? Because one of the things that we are, one of the big problems that most first-time buyers face is how to save their deposit. They're really working hard to get that 10 or 20%, depending on whether they're going to LMI territory. And they use up every cent that they have to put into the property and the costs of purchasing the property. So, are there some tips that you can give people about how to allocate and make sure that they do have that extra fund there? Because, if they're using all their deposit to get the biggest, best house that they can possibly afford, then it doesn't leave much in that emergency fund.
No, that's right. And in an ideal world, Megan, what we would have is a first home buyer who has the deposit and the money set aside for an emergency fund. So when I say emergency fund, that's not used for investing or for purchasing a home. Ideally, that's used on top of, or it's sitting aside to the actual deposit that you need. And so one thing that I kind of stumbled upon when I was speaking to a really good mortgage broker was that if you do save up your deposit, what you can find with a really good broker, and this is if you want to go down the LMI route, is you can actually sometimes keep that deposit, take a larger loan, and have that money just sitting in your offset account. So then effectively your deposit becomes your emergency fund once you've got the house. So that's
a different way to look at it.
Okay. Yeah, so that's kind of a workaround. And it's not ideal for everyone, because then obviously you've got a bigger loan. So there are drawbacks to that. But in the meantime, in terms of saving the money, one of the questions I know we're going to talk about is, and this is something that I probably get every day, to be honest, is, hey, Owen, I've got this money. It's not growing fast enough because interest rates are X. Now what do I do with my money? Can I put that in the share market? And my answer, and the answer of almost every good investment professional, is no. Yep. So the reality is that it sucks to put that money in a term deposit right now when you're getting interest rates of 0.5%, 1% if you're lucky. But the reality is that the stock market, while it has done extremely well over the past 10 years, could have done maybe the opposite. And from one year to the next, it can fall 20 or 30%. So imagine you've saved up $80,000 or $100,000 for a deposit, which is a great effort. Imagine then in the next year, because you think, I need to get ahead faster, that FOMO kicks in. And you think, okay, I'm going to put this in the stock market. I'm just going to go with something defensive, air quotes, and it falls 30%. All of a sudden, in a year from now, your $100,000 or $70,000, and you're probably much further behind than you otherwise would be. So one of the best pieces of financial advice, and this is actually a joke amongst financial planners, is that the best piece of advice you can give anyone is earn more. Because it just makes sense, right? Just earn more, and then you don't have as many issues.
Can I wrap that up succinctly and say there's no fast track?
Yeah, that's what I should have said. Yep, good answer. Yeah.
So it's about being a bit more patient and not trying to. Certainly, someone who's really high on the risk. They're comfortable with risk. That might be a gamble, and I'm going to call it a gamble. That might be a gamble they're prepared to take, but for most people, saving up that much money actually takes years, and putting it into a volatile marketplace such as the share market could just have that, as you say, that reverse effect.
Yeah, and so just for some, just to lead on from that, I've heard some disaster stories which probably turned out favourable for the people, but parents giving their children advice that they should put their deposit in Bitcoin because it seems to be going up, and all types of craziness. And from in certain windows, because of our recency bias, we tend to look at the performance of these things and go, oh yeah, over the past year it's done really well. But that says nothing about what's going to happen in the next year. So you've got to be really mindful of that. But just in terms of some tips, Megan, just to come back to those tips, I said the joke amongst financial planners is earn more. Well, there's really only two things you can do, and anyone can do, is that earn more or spend less.
I'm taking notes here, by the way.
Yeah. So the way that you can earn more can be actually quite simple and quite quirky. For example, if you're a younger person, you might be able to get a second job on the weekend. I know it sounds tough, but you could do that for 6 to 12 months. Another way, and you can do that with the gig economy, you can drive for Uber, you can do odd jobs on Airtasker, Freelancer, all these places. The other thing you can do, and it might be available to you, is you can sell things you don't need. So that actually juices your emergency fund really quickly. There was a study that came out a few years ago, I think it was about 2 years ago, by the government, and it effectively said that 20% of Australians cannot save $2,000 for an emergency fund. And that is very, very alarming when you think about that.
It's living weight to weight, paycheck to paycheck.
It is. And so it's simple fix. I'm going to say simple. I'm not going to say it's easy, but a simple fix is look at the stuff around you and see if you can sell some of it. Some of us will walk around with $2,000 iPhones, but we don't have $2,000 for an emergency fund. And that kind of thing, it just kind of like boggles the mind. But that's a really simple step. The other thing is when you're in a first home buyer territory and you're thinking about saving money, that oftentimes the biggest thing that you can do is get rid of your second car. If you're in a relationship, is get rid of that car, because the car, even though it might cost you on paper, $200 or $300 a month in repayments if you've got a personal loan, there's also all the things that go with that are kind of hidden costs, things like tolls, fuel, servicing, tires, everything that goes into that, and it can amount to maybe $10,000 a year if you've got a certain car. So if you can get rid of that and you can do it rough, catch public transport, buy a secondhand car. There are online auction places where you can go and you can get secondhand cars that are probably better than the one you have now for less without a loan. And so yeah, exactly. If you need to go to the, IKEA to get furniture and you're worried about, will I have a car? Use GoGet, which is just a hire service.
Fabulous.
And being really creative in this way and seeing what you can get away with is actually really powerful, because it kind of resets expectations for later in life as well.
Buy a coffee machine.
Buy a coffee machine, and you could probably buy one secondhand if you've got Facebook Marketplace.
Yeah.
Some great tips in there, Veronica.
They're really good tips, and it's very true that once you got a mortgage, then you're forced to continue saving effectively because you're then paying it back. The thing though that is that's interesting there, I love that earn more money, and I remember having 2 jobs and all that sort of thing, and I was saving a deposit, and it is important. But the emergency fund, and that is something that you raised there, Megan. Yes, that's such a hard thing to think about when you think, oh my God, every cent that I've got is going towards a deposit. If you don't have one and something happens, then everything that you've worked towards is eroded if you're forced to sell the property. So it really is so important. And this is one of the reasons why we do talk about getting a really good broker early on, in our the PACE system that our whole course is built around. The first bit, preparation, the whole, you're getting your support crew is number one. Before you even really save your deposit, you sort of got to know who you're going to need advice from.
Or get online to search.
Yeah. It's like while you're saving the deposit effectively, the support crew, where's the information going to come from, and getting a good broker that can actually be creative with that. And I love that. It's funny because when you sort of said about emergency fund, and I thought, and I jotted down LMI, and then you brought it up. And it is one of those things that it's a cost, and it's easy to focus on that, but then being creative around, well, how do you allocate all that money is really important. Now, when it comes to money fitness, I mean, we aren't taught this stuff at school. I mean, I remember being taught compound interest, and that's sort of about it, and you get taught about budgeting, and that's an awful word because it sounds a bit like going on a diet. Where do you start? If you have not been educated in this area and you think, God, I'm going to buy a house, and I hope to buy a house, I've got to do all this stuff. What's the first step?
So I think one of the things that we often miss, and even as professionals, we often miss this, is that the single most powerful thing about money and about saving, about investing, is it actually has nothing to do with numbers and all to do with your behavior. So how you act, how you live your life is actually a pretty good reflection of how you'll do with money. And so, for example, if you're the type of person who likes to be considered and think about your options, you're willing to forgo those kind of really rough behavioral biases that we succumb to, things like FOMO, like fear of missing out. When everyone else is doing it, everyone else is making money in Bitcoin, or they're buying these weird mining stocks on the stock market. So those are the types of things that really lead us astray. And so if you think about the most successful people around you, chances are what you'll find is they're very considered people, and they're people that tend to think before they act. And that's very important when it comes to money and even budgeting in general, because oftentimes you can put all these wonderful things down in a spreadsheet, but what it comes back to is what you're prepared to sacrifice. And that's all about behavior. So saving money is about what you are prepared to sacrifice. And for some people, it's very hard to sacrifice things. So things like going to the movies or going out with a friend at the bar and buying $200 worth of beer or wine or whatever you're spending your money on. Those types of things are sacrifices that you need to make every day. And your spreadsheet isn't going to say to you, oh, don't worry, you'll be all right. Here's this is what's on the other side. The thing is here, and this is something I've read from a book, in a book recently, is that it's about being reasonable with money and not being rational. So people try to put it in a spreadsheet and say, I'm going to save, 20% of my income. This is excluding super. So super would be on top of this. I'm going to put 50% away into living expenses or just costs of life. And then 30% it goes into those wants. So things like going out or, a fancy car and the like. But that 20% is often, very much okay for a lot of people, but not okay for some. And then what happens is we tend to get really down with ourselves when we don't achieve that. And that's where that behavioral kind of reinforcement has to kick in for you. So you have to think, yeah, you know what? I ate into my emergency fund. I didn't get my 20% target, but I'm going to start with 5%. I'm going to start with 2% this month and just try and get those feedback loops, those positive feedback loops rolling. So for budgeting, this is the thing that we should be taught at school instead of pi r cubed equals the volume of a circle. What we should be taught is that it's okay to not know much about money. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to have to go and read or listen to a podcast or speak with someone. And money shouldn't be a thing that we think about and we're scared or we're intimidated. I was very intimidated when I was younger. I come from a background where money was a very stressful thing. And that led to more of these bad emotions and biases going on. So the things we should be taught at school, in summary, are it has more to do with who you are and just letting go of those beliefs that, you might not be able to save as much as someone else, and that's okay. Let go of that belief that you've got to track what the Kardashians are doing or whatever they're doing. That's okay. The other thing is, I would say, another thing that we're not taught at school and something that we see a lot in Australia is the price of something doesn't necessarily reflect its quality. So if you're budgeting and you're thinking, I need to go and buy the good oatmeal because it's the good stuff, it's the brand stuff. Oftentimes that's not true. And again, it comes back to what you're prepared to sacrifice. So cutting down on those things can make a big difference at the end of the day. And in terms of budgeting, just know where your money is, because a lot of the times for most people, it's very revealing to find out what subscriptions are coming out of your bank account. And you can do that by asking your bank for a list of direct deposits or just cutting up your debit and your credit card. Like that stuff is a really easy fix. If you want to stop things coming out of your bank account, cut up your bank account, change banks, do something like that. And that's a really easy way to do it. Because, those are just simple steps. And you notice how I focus on behavior more so than the numbers, because if we say numbers like save 20% of your income, which I think is ideal, by the way, if you can do that, fantastic, go ahead and do that. But you notice I focus on that because sometimes those spreadsheets don't work for everyone.
I'm going to give you one word, Owen. Afterpay.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that.
Yeah. So this is an interesting one, right? Because this comes back to the behavioral element. So our minds are wired, our monkey brains are wired so that instant gratification is something that, we kind of live on. We feed on that instant gratification. So the sooner we have something, the better it is. Like if you go up to a child and you say, I'll give you $100 worth of lollipops right now, or I'll give you $110 in a year from now. So this is the time value of money trick, right? That's a 10% return in a year. They're almost always going to take the lollipop.
It's the marshmallow test. Have you heard of that?
Exactly, marshmallow test.
It's the marshmallow test.
There's no concept of like, delaying the gratification so that then you can make a good return, right? Yeah. So that's
have you heard the line from Homer Simpson? No, that's a problem for future Homer. I sure don't admire that
That's guy. A great one. That's good. I haven't heard of that, but that works, right? And so Afterpay is built on that. It's built upon instant gratification. It's bringing forward a purchasing decision. So you bring forward, this is not Afterpay, it's every buy now, pay later company. It brings forward the gratification that you get from an object. And the problem is oftentimes when you get that, you realize it's not that big of a deal and you probably didn't need to buy it in the first place. But the way this loops back into another behavioral element, which we just talked about, is that if you use Afterpay wisely, it's actually a really good budgeting tool. Now, I'm always scared to say that because then people fly off the radar and they're like, Owen just said this buy now, pay later thing's fantastic. We should go and do it.
Use it.
Yeah, use it. Go and get an Afterpay account. Yeah. If you can use it wisely, you pay it back. You don't have to, budgeting's not an issue for you. Like I know people, not to butter my own bread here, but I know people that are multimillionaires who use Afterpay for their budgeting because for them, there's no cost associated with it, right? That's not the same with all of those providers, but this one in general. But then there are people who get one Afterpay debt and they go to Zip, then they go to all of the other buy now, pay later providers, and all of a sudden they've got a lot of debt.
Yeah.
And the way I think about that and what scares me about that is that in my mind and the way I look at it as a financial professional is that's exactly the same as having a credit card because it does things to you emotionally and behaviorally that would be akin to, family violence or domestic abuse, that type of stress that you feel in your life. That's where that leads. And you do not want that in your life. So I don't use Afterpay. I've got an account. I don't use it. I don't recommend people use that type of thing, but just be mindful that there are two ways to use almost everything in life. And you've got to know what you're getting yourself into and what the risks are before you do.
It comes back to that.
With the first time buyer the other day, and they were talking about how to actually start becoming financially fit. And they, you talk about behaviour and FOMO, and this is a really sad situation that the salesperson actually said to them, well, if you can't afford to pay $500 today, just Afterpay it.
Yeah.
And that's the key, right? Can't afford.
Yeah.
If you can't afford it now, you can't afford it in the future.
Well, that's a fair criticism of all of those things. And it's the same, I would say, with a lot of the material objects that we get in life. So things like cars. And the three of us know that these are assets or objects, material items that we would associate with bad debt, right? So these are bad debts. There are good debts and there are bad debts. And anything that you purchase using credit or a loan, that is a bad debt. So an asset that typically falls down in value as soon as you take it out of the shop, that is something that you should not be using finance for. If there is something like a home and it's a primary residence or an investment property, those are assets that go up. So if you can manage that debt,
go up.
Can
go up.
Can
Hopefully
go up. Exactly.
go
Select
up.
the right asset.
Fingers crossed.
Yes.
No crossing of fingers. No, there is actually a methodology to follow to choose the right asset.
No, that's right. And I was listening to your most recent podcast. It's on the website this morning, and you talked about that at length, right? And if you do purchase a good asset, it's like people use debt for shares, which would never advocate for. I'm against that. Not because they don't go up over time, tend to go or can go up over time. The point is that they're more volatile. And the banks aren't as generous with their rates that they offer you. But so the point here is that if you're going to use any type of credit or loan financing, whatever you want to call it, to buy something, make sure it's something that is investment grade.
So that's a really good fundamental for buying a house or an apartment. I am curious though, because of course some people might choose to invest in the share market at the same time as saving for a home loan or for a home deposit. Why would someone do that? And I guess what sort of person, what sort of situation might lend itself to that being an approach?
So you've probably seen that tortilla or taco ad, and it's got the little girl, and I can't repeat her Spanish, but what she says is, it's a debate between hard shell tacos and soft shell tacos. And she says, why not have both? And I think that's a great approach. So one thing that we emphasize at our business, Rask Australia, what we emphasize is that we're not going to tell you if you should buy that property and not buy that one, or buy that share and not buy the share, although that's what we do, or do this, don't do that. What we're saying is, it's okay to do a little bit of everything. What if you look around you and you study the most successful people you know? So when I say successful, I mean financially successful. If you look around you and you see and you take stock of the people around you, I'd be willing to bet that almost all of them have owned something that creates value. So they haven't worked harder. They've owned a business or they've owned an asset that's gone up in value. Right. The key here is accumulate assets. So an asset could be a share, it could be an ETF, it could be a property. I don't know, whatever it could be that you're into, maybe exotic surfboards that go up in value. I don't know what they are, but you could have something that goes up in value. And so what the key thing here is that if you want to do all of those things, go and do them. But also make sure that that emergency fund is not touched. And if you do have a goal of saving a home, just make sure that that money that you've got in the stock market isn't getting mixed up with that deposit. We say that anything less than 3 years, money that may be needed in less than 3 years, should not touch the share market. So, you know, for example, when I was saving up for my first home,
that's an interesting one. So that's not a tip that we've heard previously. Can you just bring that right back to the start again and take us through that one again?
Yeah. So because the stock market, and I'm not, reinventing the wheel here. This is very common knowledge that the stock market tends to crash. And by that, I mean a 20% fall or greater before starting to come back, tends to crash, depending on the studies you look at, every 4 to 7 years. So somewhere in that 4 to 7 year window, you will see the value of your investment go backwards, and probably considerably, right? So if you're trying to time the market and you're thinking, everyone, it seems like a pretty good time to get in the market right now. Well, hey, that 1 in 4 years or 1 in 7 years could be this year. And so the best way to ride out that and just kind of smooth that expectation and versus the returns of the market is to adopt a longer term time horizon. So take that 3-year minimum approach. So if you have $10,000 now and you want to buy a house in 18 months, you wouldn't put that money in the share market. You would just keep saving using the tips that we talked about, but also trying to earn more, et cetera, et cetera. And you would do that rather than trying to put that in the share market for a long, long time. But I'll give you an example of what my partner and I did. We've been investing in shares for, I'm going to say 10 years now. And when we decided to save for a home, we didn't touch the money that was in the share market. So we saved outside of that. Now, we're very fortunate that I started this 10 years ago. And, the reality is that we earn pretty good money and our expenses are insanely low. So when we went to the bank to get finance, they actually came back to us 2 or 3 times to say, no, that can't be right. And so our expenses are so low.
Yeah.
Frugal.
The banks are doing their job. This was before the responsible lending laws were proposed to be wound back. So, that's I guess an example of how we did it. I was comfortable investing in shares. And so what I say to people, like our members come to me a lot, our younger members, they might be young professionals, 30 years old. They're on $80,000 that they might have a partner, they might not. And they're saying, Owen, I've got 40 or 50 grand in cash. I'm not planning on buying a house for a few years, but I want to get started investing, but I also want to keep the flexibility so that if I do want to buy a house sooner than that, I can. What should I do? And the default response to that is pretty simple. Put some money aside that's your deposit money, that's in a separate high interest savings account, and then open your online stockbroking account, whatever it might be. And then as your money comes in, a really simple rule of thumb is just put half of your savings in your deposit and half the savings straight into your brokerage account so you don't touch either of them. And they don't mix, they don't cross over. So then the money that's in your stockbroking account can be used to buy ETFs or shares, and the money that goes into your deposit is just getting tucked away there. If you save some more money, maybe put more into your deposit. And my 50-50 rule is only just a general rule. You could do whatever you want. You could put 20% into your stockbroking account and 80% into your deposit. And that is perfectly okay. And I see a lot of people doing that.
And I think too, what we're talking about is having a long-term view in the share market as well as in property. The one benefit of shares, of course, is that there's what's called liquid, which means that you can sell bits of it. You can sell small holdings. You can, whereas you can't sell a house, a bedroom or a carport or a bathroom or something. Once you commit to that house, it's what's called a lumpy investment. You can't get out of it very simply and certainly not cost effectively. So there's lots to be said in terms of a long-term, to setting yourself up long-term for financial fitness, which is the theme of this episode, but also financial wealth creation. Let's face it, we all want to be, comfortable, don't we? At least, right? If someone though, and we'll get in a minute to the problem is, of course, if you save $40,000 for a deposit, unless you've got a really good income and can actually get access to the government's 5%, home saver deposit scheme, or what? God, I get confused myself in all the names of these. Or your parents go guarantor, or you pay LMI in order to buy a property, you might be really hamstrung. So the type of property that you can buy is really limited by the amount of money that you can save for a deposit, and obviously then what you can borrow and then what you can repay. And if it turns out that you really have such a tiny budget, yes, you can afford to buy something, but it's not going to be very good. It's going to be tiny, like a studio apartment. Oh, and actually, you won't be able to get that anyway because banks won't lend you for something so small. But it could be a really little bit, one bedder right next to the train line on a main road in a grubby little suburb. I mean, it could be that, yes, you can afford it. Yes, you'll be able to find a tenant for it, but is it a good investment? Is it a good property to own? Or you might even want to live there, but then it's unsafe, and fundamentally you'd be better spending your money doing something else with your money, I should say, rather than spending your money. So how can people make up? Because one of the benefits, obviously, of owning your own home is that A, you live in it, or you can. B, that, you're borrowing a lot of money. So you've got what's called leverage, which means you've got more money and it actually supposedly working hard for you as long as it's a good asset. But that's not possible for everyone. And this is the thing that Megan and I, as property people, it's rare to hear property people say, no, there are times not to buy property. There are people that shouldn't buy property, and that you'll be worse off financially if you buy property. So what would you suggest to people like that to say, but I'll be missing out on owning my own property, my own home? How can they still build wealth?
Yeah, I often ask my barber when the best time to get a haircut is, and he almost always says today. So that's something that you get a lot, right? And I think the people that are being honest with you are the people that will tell you something that's not in their interests. And so, for a long time, so back, I've just turned 30, so I'm starting to lose my hair now, so I'm getting a bit on, but. I remember when
Stop it, Owen.
Could be your mother.
So I remember when I was around about 21, 22, and I had enough money to buy a house. I worked really hard through uni. I worked effectively full time while studying, and also through high school. I was working 5 shifts a week at the local supermarket. So I was working really hard for everything that I had, and I remember asking around, what I should invest in. A lot of people that owned investment property told me to buy investment property. And, but then I was reading Warren Buffett books and he was saying buy businesses. So I ended up going down the path of what Warren Buffett advocates for. And what my point here is that I didn't end up buying the house because it wasn't right for me. And I thought that there was more, wealth creation potential early on in my life with businesses. And the reason why I say that is because I thought I could take more risk at that age. So I thought to myself, I can afford to live with the regret of potentially not buying a house and things going up. So that's okay. I can live with that. If property goes up, I can live with that. But I'm going to take a risk. So I'm going to take a risk and buy some businesses. And what I mean by businesses, I mean shares, because shares just represent ownership of businesses. And so that's what I did. And I did that from a young age. And so at that stage in my life, buying a property wasn't right for me. I was still finding myself in my career and those types of things. So there are definitely times in people's lives where buying a property isn't right, even if it's not for financial reasons. And so then if it's, if you're thinking, okay, I don't want to buy in the suburb that, I can't buy in the suburb that I want to buy in. Maybe there's another opportunity for you. And that's where this podcast is fantastic, because you can help people do that. And you've got the short course there to help people question themselves and find out where they can buy and think about that. And so those are great resources that you should be taking advantage of. But, there is a thing to be said for rent vesting. So whether you are renting and then you buy in another location, or I don't know what the word for it would be, but maybe if you rent and you invest in the stock market, maybe it's still rent vesting, but a different type, I guess.
Yeah, different asset class.
Yeah, and you can do that too. You can buy ETFs, exchange traded funds, which are very simple investments to make on the stock market, and you can do that. And there are benefits to that. Like Veronica said, they are more liquid. So if you did need money for whatever reason, they are available in your brokerage account. You can buy different things. So you can invest in overseas shares. You can invest in Australian shares. You can invest in what we call real estate investment trusts. So these are like big investors that go into property, and you can buy, investments in that organization, that REIT, or real estate investment trust. And so you can do those things as well. And that's all available via the stock market. So I think Barefoot Investor called it postcode povos, where you live in one suburb and you buy in another. And then, there's other people who advocate for real estate investment trusts and doing it that way too. So there's many different ways to do it. And the really important thing is just understanding that if the property market does go up, that's okay, because you're still investing in something else, as long as you're investing in something. So this is where it comes back to accumulate assets. I've heard another definition of that: buy something with an exclamation mark. Just buy something. As long as you're doing something with your money, then that's going to be doing better than doing nothing.
I think it has to be well thought out, though, doesn't it? And well advised.
Absolutely. Like, don't just go and buy Bitcoin or something like that because you've heard about it online. We're not
big advocates of buy anything just because.
No, but my point is more so that
if you don't act.
Buy something
act under
that
guidance.
is an asset. And, whether that's, in my case, it was buying businesses via shares, or whether it's, a first home buyer buying a property, or whether it's a property investor, or whatever the case might be, it's good to know that you're investing in something, and that will give you comfort if whatever else you could have invested in does go up.
I think you mentioned Rentvesting. I think that's great that you mentioned that, because a lot of people who can't afford the home that they want to live in or the location they want to live in, they look to Rentvesting as an alternative. And we did an episode a couple weeks back. So if you want to look at that Rentvesting episode, or the options if you can't afford to buy where you want to be, that is one of the options. Now, but one of the options that we didn't discuss in that episode was absolutely investing elsewhere, not in property. And I think one of the big risks with Rentvesting is that it's still lumpy. It's one property that you're buying, and then down the track, if your circumstances change or you partner up or you get more money, more income, you can afford the home that you want in the location that you want. If unless you're earning a lot more money, you're probably not going to be able to do that without selling the property that you bought as a Rentvesting option. And if you didn't do that and then trading property is really expensive. And so therefore, if you got the option to actually invest in the share market instead, and with guidance and with research and then absolutely that's a legitimate thing to consider. And I think that that's something that we really want to get into the discussion with first home buyers. It's not property or die, that that if you're not a failure if you haven't bought a property, because you actually can lose money in property so easily. And it's a one-way ticket for some people, and it's not a very pleasant journey that they just bought the one-way ticket on. So we want to make sure that they make really good decisions and actually don't get themselves in that situation, which is why we want to talk to you about this.
And you hit the nail on the head, Owen. It wasn't the right time for you to buy a property. And that's a really important factor. It doesn't mean that another time wasn't the right time for you to buy a property. It just simply wasn't that in that phase in your life at that time, and with the goals that you had, property was not the vehicle for you to actually achieve the goals that you wanted to achieve. And I think that's just invaluable advice for people to take on board. Just because everyone else is buying a house doesn't mean you have to.
Yeah. Actually, Owen, you also said one thing that I thought was interesting. You said that it's almost like you're saying that buying a property wouldn't have been risky at that stage, but investing in shares was risky. And I guess that's the thing that too, we just want to put the spotlight that actually buying property is risky too.
Yeah.
But whereas we sort of all brought up to think bricks and mortar, it's safe. You can still drive past it. It's always there. And let's face it, it is less volatile than the share market, certainly, but it is still risky. And I think that that's a really important thing that, if you listen to us too much, you would never buy a property. But if you do it right, you can do so well in life. Can you really be very secure?
I might just quickly loop in 2 points there, what you both said, Veronica and Megan. So the first one is that, with property being such a large purchase, if we go back to the idea of the marshmallow or the kid with the lollipops, the first one that you actually purchase is actually the most important.
Oh yeah.
So the thing is with
Absolutely.
stocks and with your share market, your brokerage account, you can start with $500. So from that perspective, buying something, I would hope that for most people listening to this, if they did lose $500, it's not life or death. But if you go into a tragic circumstance with a property and you think, oh my Lord, what have I done? That's a big deal, right? And then to loop in with my experience, the idea of risk. So when I meant risk before, what I was referring to was the risk that I got it wrong. So the risk that I wasn't happy investing in businesses or shares.
As in that choice.
Yeah, my choice. And I would have to live with that. The risk that I would regret it.
Yeah.
And I took that risk early on because there was, let's say, there's a 20% chance that the risk was that I regret it. Well, there's the other 80%, which could actually mean that it was a good decision. So I wanted to make sure that I gave that a shot while I was younger, because once I had kids and started a business and done all that sort of stuff, I probably wouldn't have had that flexibility to make up for lost time.
Yeah.
And so that's what I was thinking about with risk. Yeah, I've heard some shocking first home buyer stories. And that's why I love resources like this. And I'm not just saying that because I'm on show. I'm such a big advocate for anyone that educates people, especially on first home buying, because you see it go wrong, people just don't get it. And it's so scary for them.
Often don't find that out until 10 years down, 5 years down the track when you go to sell it.
Yeah. And that's the really scary thing about property, and always shares too, but also probably because of that high upfront cost. It takes a lot of effort to get one. And then it also, it can be risky. So you want to do it right. And that's why, courses, short courses, any type of course is such a brilliant resource for property buying. Because let's just say, I know the course you've got at the moment is pretty low price, I think $39. But let's say you had a $1,000 course, right? If that $1,000 saves you $50,000, then that is money well spent. Or if it makes you $50,000 more because you bought in the right location, then that is money well spent. And people don't think like that because, again, it doesn't have that instant gratification. What do you mean I've got to put in the work? What do you mean there's no guarantee of an outcome? Well, that's the type of thing that you've got to do to make good decisions and make sure that the risk is as low as possible. Yeah. And so,
Well, I think we're going to get a grab out of that one, Veronica, because you've actually just pre-sold your first home buyer guide course, which is in the vicinity of the range you're talking about. And I certainly think that people will be saving themselves well in excess of $50,000, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars if they make the wrong decision. Yeah. Now, Veronica, I just want to, I've got a lot out of this and I've been taking notes. So I just thought I'd recap some of the key takeaways that I've got from our discussions with Owen, and then throw to you to see if there's anything else you want to add or if I've missed any pertinent points. And the first one was the emergency fund. I think that's such a great piece of advice. Everyone focuses on saving the deposit, but having the emergency fund, that 3-6 months worth of expenses for the unexpected, just a great piece of advice. Earn more, spend less. Pretty basic, but it's real, isn't it? Rather than saying, well, how can I save quicker? What are some ways that I can accelerate that saving? Earn more, and you gave us some really good examples of how you could do that. Saving 20% of your income is a really good base line to work with, and it's a good, I think, going forward, that's such a good habit to get into. It's a behavioural change to save. Taking a 3-year view of the share market. Now, it's the first time I've really heard someone sort of articulate that and give that as a piece of advice. We talk about property having a, at least minimum 5-year time frame, if not 7 or 10, probably preferable. But 3-year view of the share market is a really good one. And you are absolutely preaching from the same choir book when you say that the first property purchase is the most important one. And certainly in the course and everything that we talk about, it is getting that first one right, because if you save so hard to get that money and you've made the sacrifices and you've done all of that work, then you need to make sure that getting the asset selection right in the first point, the first time that you purchase is critical. Veronica, is there anything that I've missed there that you picked up?
I don't think you have. And Owen, it's been so good having you come on and really just hit all these great points and really, really practical stuff. As I said before, we will put the link in the show notes for your courses because there's a bunch of things there, really great stuff. And it's so generous of you because, we're charging $39 for our Where to Buy workshop. And actually the beta Where to Buy
Your first home buyer guide.
The beta Your First Home Buyer Guide course is $749, and that's still available in beta form, which is actually less than it will be when we finally get it all recorded at and re-recorded, reproduced. Still available at the moment because we're so busy at the moment. We haven't actually got a chance to finish it. And you're much more generous than that. You actually give a lot of courses for free. So we would encourage people to jump on there and take advantage of those and really learn some of those basic things so that you can make better decisions. So thank you again, Owen, for joining us today.
Thanks, ladies, for having me on. I look forward to seeing where this goes, and just well done for all the education you're providing to people. It's a great thing to see, and I think we need more of it. So kudos to you both.
Thank you.
Great. Appreciate your time. In this episode, we've covered a very small part of our 10-step online course for first home buyers. If you would like to learn more about the process and how to buy without making a mistake, then head over to our website, www.homebuyeracademy.com.au. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss an episode. And if you like what you've heard today, please give us an iTunes review. 5 stars would be wonderful. It will help others find us as well.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you found this really useful. And if you have, please share the love with others who you know are in the same boat. We'll be back next week with some more priceless stuff.